Hey legends, welcome to Cross Harry. Buckle up for today's story. What if Godzilla chose Harry as king of monsters, and every kaiju made Dumbledore fear destruction? A like and subscribe goes a long way. Now let's jump in. Chapter 1, The Recognition. The letter came on a Tuesday, which felt like an indignity layered over a mystery layered over the general, ongoing indignity of existing in a house where your name was spoken the way you'd speak a diagnosis. Harry kept it inside his pillowcase for 3 days, not because he hadn't read it. He'd read it in 4 seconds flat, standing in the hallway with the Morning Post scattered around his feet, while Uncle Vernon's voice was still coming down the stairs wanting to know why the post hadn't been brought through. He'd read it and slid it under his jumper and brought Vernon his newspaper and gone back to the cupboard under the stairs and read it again in the dark, by the thin seam of light under the door. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He read it 11 more times. Vernon found it on the 4th day, and the house went the way it always went with Vernon, which was loud and red-faced and eventually involving a lock. But letters kept coming. They came through the chimney in a burst of crisp white that smelled of old wax and something cool and mineral. They came under the front door in the early mornings, sliding across the hallway tiles with a papery whisper. One managed the mail slot at 3 in the morning. Harry heard it from inside the cupboard as a sound like someone had posted a pigeon, and he lay in the dark with his face turned toward the sliver of light and thought, someone knows my name. He thought about that for a long time. Then he thought, someone knows where I sleep. He wasn't sure which one felt stranger. By the time Uncle Vernon bundled the family into a car, and then another car, and eventually a motorboat toward an island in the middle of grey, hammering Scottish sea, convinced, apparently, that the Atlantic Ocean was a reasonable postal barrier, Harry had read 9 different copies of the same letter and had memorized every detail of the seal. An H.A. badger, a snake, an eagle, a lion. Something that looked like it was an ongoing disagreement with itself across a central shield. Beneath the crest, in a language he was beginning to associate with the idea that somewhere, someone took him seriously. Draco Dormiens nunquam titulundus. Never tickle a sleeping dragon, he thought. Whoever wrote that has a sense of humor. He thought, I'd like to meet them. He held this thought carefully, the way you carry something fragile across a room where the floor is uncertain. Hagrid came like weather. You don't decide to let weather in, you simply find that it is in. The door of the island hut came off its hinges, which was one way of solving the problem of a door, and Hagrid folded himself into the space with the specific ease of someone enormously large, who has never once considered that the world should rearrange itself to accommodate them, and has therefore, over time, become practiced at simply taking up the space that's available and making it sufficient. He smelled of wood smoke and something older, some stratum of earth that hadn't been touched since before anyone's grandfather drew a first breath. He looked at Harry directly, completely, with the uncomplicated assumption that Harry was worth looking at, which was its own strange thing in Harry's experience. Most adults in the category of authority looked at him the way you look at a problem you've been asked to solve and would rather not have been asked about. Harry Potter, Hagrid said. Harry said nothing. 11 years old, lives in a cupboard, extremely practiced. You're a wizard, Harry. The wind hit the hut from the northwest, hard enough that the single dirty window flexed in its frame. Rain came nearly horizontal. Inside, the fire Hagrid had coaxed from the grate, which by any physical accounting should not have worked at all, threw orange light across the walls, across Dudley's sleeping face, across Vernon's red and rigid one. Harry sat with a thin blanket around his shoulders, and his glasses slightly fogged, and turned the word over in his skull. Wizard. Didn't expand outward the way surprise does. It went down, settled, like something slotting into a space that had been waiting for it, that had been shaped exactly right for it, that had been empty in a particular and specific way, not the way a room is empty, but the way a sentence is empty when the word that belongs in it hasn't arrived yet. Yeah, Harry said. Okay, Hagrid blinked. Okay. Yeah, he pulled the blanket tighter. When do we leave? Diagon Alley was noise and color, and the smell of old wax, and something burning pleasantly somewhere 3 shops to the left. Harry walked through it with his eyes moving constantly, not darting, not nervous, just cataloging, the way he'd always cataloged, the way you catalog when your survival in a given house depends on knowing which floorboard creaks, and when Vernon's breathing changes pitch, and what Dudley's silences mean versus his loud approaches. He cataloged owls, 40 or 50 varieties, stacked in cages that shouldn't physically accommodate all of them but did. Cauldrons, pewter and copper, and one enormous green-black, one with sigils carved into the base that seemed to rearrange when you looked at them from slightly different angles. A witch with a hat so tall it had developed its own microclimate. A boy, roughly his age, standing in front of a broom shop window with a longing so transparent Harry felt he should look away. Underneath all the cataloging was a sensation he hadn't experienced enough times to have named, His feet on the cobblestones knew something his head was still processing, that he was allowed here, not tolerated. Not a problem the management was pretending to have resolved. Allowed, in the specific sense of belonging, which was different, which was the difference between being permitted inside a room and understanding that the room was partly yours. He bought his books, he bought his cauldron. He bought Hagrid a large ice cream and sat with it outside a shop and watched people in robes moving through the afternoon with the ease of people in a place they'd always known, and he thought, I could be like that. I could learn to be like that. He bought his wand last. Ollivander's shop was quiet and dusty and very tall, the shelves going up into shadow that didn't seem to belong to any particular ceiling, and it smelled of cedar and something older, old paper, old wood, the specific antiquity of objects that have been carefully kept. Mr. Ollivander himself moved through it the way water moves through a known channel, purposefully, without wasted motion, with the efficiency of a man who has done this particular thing for a very long time. He measured Harry's arm, his nose, the space between his eyes, with a tape measure that moved without anyone holding it. He brought wands and Harry tried them, and the first 3 produced mild, alarming results: a window crack, a small explosion of something purple, a stack of boxes rearranging itself with enormous conviction, and then Ollivander climbed his ladder and came down with a box of a particular dusty burgundy, and he held the wand out, and Harry took it. The warmth started in his palm, traveled up his wrist, moved through his elbow, his forearm, his shoulder, and arrived somewhere between his shoulder blades as a low, settled hum, not heat precisely, not electricity, but a pressure, the kind of pressure that precedes something large, the way the air pressurizes before a storm, except this was a gathering inward rather than an outward expansion. The air through the dusty shop window brightened, briefly, not a dramatic brightening, just more. Ollivander said, curious, in a tone that communicated he'd been about to say something else entirely. Harry said, is it? Very. Ollivander's pale eyes were on him with both hands clasped behind his back, and an expression occupying the exact latitude between alarm and reverence, the geography between 2 things that should be distinct but keep collapsing into each other at sufficient magnitude. 11 inches. Holly and phoenix feather. The phoenix that provided the tail feather for your wand gave only one other. He paused. He was choosing his next words with a precision that suggested he was aware of their weight. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. Harry looked at the thin scar on his forehead. He looked at the wand. The hum in his chest was steady. Okay, he said. Ollivander blinked. It seemed to be what people did with him. Good wand, Harry said. Yes, Ollivander said, quietly, and in the quiet there was a great deal that the quiet was being asked to hold. A very good wand, but then he stopped. Take care, Mr. Potter. Harry thanked him, and went back out into the alley where Hagrid was waiting with an expression of relieved joy that suggested he'd worried briefly that wand selection would produce something requiring explanation. Hedwig watched everything. She was snowy and perfectly still, and her orange eyes moved at a slow, precise interval, not restless, not searching but tracking. As though she always knew where the relevant thing was, and was simply confirming at regular intervals that it had not changed position. Harry named her in the little room above the leaky cauldron, his first night in a bed that was his own, lying in it with his arms at his sides, and his glasses on the nightstand, and the ceiling above him full of ordinary plaster, and no springs from Dudley's mattress pressing down from above. He lay in that bed and did not sleep for some time, not from anxiety. He ran an inventory on what he was feeling, not anxiety. Something more like the state before a very large thing happens, a suspension, a held quality in the air, the specific stillness of something on the edge of becoming something else. He lay in the bed and felt it and did not try to name it because he was 11 and didn't have all the names yet, and that seemed, for now, fine. From her perch by the window, Hedwig watched. The Hogwarts Express was read the way essential things are their color, completely, without qualification, as if the idea of the thing and the color of the thing had been decided simultaneously at the moment of its creation. Platform 9 3/4 smelled of coal smoke and something sweet underneath, something almost alchemical, and it was full of people who knew each other in the easy, repeated contact way that Harry, who had never been allowed friends, observed with the specific attention of someone watching a skill they have not yet acquired. He found a compartment and sat in it. Outside the window, mothers pulling children back for one more embrace, children resisting with the practiced dignity of people who had calculated how much affection they could accept in public without social consequence. Harry watched them the way he watched most things, without visible reaction, processing at depth. His scar was quiet. It hurt sometimes, in certain weathers, in the middle of certain nights. Right now it was quiet. Ron came in looking for space. Hermione came in looking for a toad and stayed because the toad had been located and there was conversation available. Ron had freckles and an easy manner that suggested he was one of enough siblings to have stopped performing for adults and started simply existing in the world. Hermione had brown hair in considerable volume and the quality of someone who has discovered that information is the thing that makes the world legible and has committed to obtaining all of it. Ron offered crisps. Harry ate the crisps and said very little and found that Ron, apparently, found this completely acceptable, which was information Harry absorbed and kept. Countryside through the window went from the dense southern green of England to the darker, damper, more northern green that is less about abundance and more about endurance. The light changed, the sky lowered. At some point between Carlisle and the border, the color in the west went from ordinary gray to a shade that weather isn't supposed to be, the color that lives between bruise and electricity, a color that suggested the sky was doing something the sky didn't usually do at this latitude, responding to a signal from some proximity that had not previously been proximate. Harry's scar began to ache, not the brief, sharp, sourceless ache of his worst nights, something different. A resonance, a tone, moving through the bone behind the scar, through the skull, down the cervical spine, spreading into his sternum. Not pain, pressure. The kind of pressure that means something enormous is paying attention in the near vicinity, or something in the near vicinity is paying attention to something enormous, and the scar was the instrument calibrated to that frequency. He pressed 2 fingers to it. Hermione looked up from her book. Her eyes moved to his forehead and back to his eyes in a single motion that contained an entire concerned sentence. Fine, Harry said before she could ask. He kept his fingers on the scar and looked out the window, and the color in the west persisted, that wrong purple-green, sitting on the horizon like a signature, like something announcing itself from a distance, saying, I am here and I have been here, and soon we will be close enough for you to understand what that means. He lowered his hand. The ache receded to a hum. It didn't stop. It settled into the base of his sternum and sat there for the rest of the journey, patient, low, directional, pointing ahead like a compass pointing north, except that north, in this case, was not a direction on a map, but a specific address in Scotland with towers that caught clouds. Hogwarts was impossible the way genuinely impossible things are impossible. Not impossible like a magic trick. Magic tricks have mechanisms, and the impossibility of a magic trick is the temporary suspension of your ability to locate the mechanism. This was impossible in the way that makes every previous definition of possible seem like it was set too small, like the word had been calibrated for a scale of experience that this object simply refused to fit into. Grew out of the rock. That was the only reasonable description, not built upon the rock but continuous with it, as if the rock itself had decided, over centuries, to become this, the way certain things become themselves through accretion and pressure and time, rather than intention. The towers caught clouds at the top. Not pierced them, caught them, the way fabric catches on a nail, the clouds snagging on the uppermost spires and pulling and thinning and coming apart against the stone. The lake beside it was black and still. Harry stood in the boat and looked at it, and the lake was not merely black in the way that deep water is black. It was black in the way a mirror is dark, which is to say it was reflecting something. The castle's towers went down into it in perfect inversion, stone becoming shadow stone, lit windows becoming lit absences, the turrets at the lake's bottom as detailed and exact as the ones above. He looked at the reflection for a long moment, and the reflection looked back, and somewhere in the deepest part of what those reflected towers pointed toward, something enormous and patient and very old was paying attention. The ache in his sternum sharpened. Once, a single struck note, clean as a tuning fork. And the boats reached the shore, and McGonagall was there in green robes with a quality of attention that categorized and assessed without appearing to do either. And the impossible castle received them through doors that opened into a warmth and a smell of old stone and beeswax candles, and something that might have been the residue of 2,000 years of concentrated magic, which is a smell that should not exist as a physical thing, but does faintly in the corridors of very old places where a great deal has happened. The Sorting Hat muttered things at him that he didn't fully follow, occupied as the back of his mind was with the persistent hum that had been his companion since Carlisle and was louder now, not painfully, but unmistakably, because the source of it was close, beneath the floor, beneath the grounds. Beneath the black water of the lake he'd crossed in a small boat 5 minutes ago. Gryffindor, the hat said. Harry stepped off the stool and went to his table and ate roast chicken, and listened to the enchanted ceiling show its stars, and put the hum in the category of things to return to when the immediate situation is less overwhelming, which was a category he'd always found useful. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, Harry learned the castle the way he learned all closed spaces he'd been placed in, systematically, without appearing to, starting from the exits and working inward. He mapped the trick step on the 4th floor staircase. He mapped the corridor on the 3rd floor that Dumbledore had mentioned in passing as dangerous, which had the immediate effect of making him want to know what specifically was dangerous about it, which he filed and did not act on yet because yet was a useful qualifier. He went to classes. Charms produced in him a focused, clean pleasure. There was a right way and a wrong way, and the path from wrong to right was navigable by precision, which was a type of problem he found congenial. Transfiguration was McGonagall, and McGonagall was the kind of demanding that respects effort, which Harry had spent years directing at tasks like make breakfast without breaking anything and could redirect without difficulty. Potions was Snape. Harry thought about Snape the way he thought about most complex inputs, carefully, from multiple angles, without committing to a conclusion until he had more data. Snape looked at him with a kind of active, scathing discomfort that Harry recognized as personal. This was not how Snape looked at Ron or Hermione or Neville. This was specific. There was history in it that Harry was not yet in possession of, which meant he should acquire the history before deciding what the look meant. He did not raise his hand in potions. He answered Snape's questions when called upon, briefly and correctly, and watched Snape process the correctness with something that looked like annoyance being redirected from its original target. He ate full meals and had to consciously correct, sometimes, for the habit of restraint. The hum in his sternum was always there. It came from the direction of the lake, and it spoke no language and asked nothing of him, and simply existed at the bottom register of his experience, the way a very deep organ note simply exists in a stone cathedral, not heard so much as occupied, settled into the chest and the hollow spaces of the bones, constant as a heartbeat. He didn't mention it to anyone. It didn't seem like a thing that needed mentioning yet. It seemed like a thing that was happening in its own time and would declare itself when declaration was appropriate. The first Sunday in October, he went to the lake before breakfast. He went because the hum was different that morning, not louder but closer, the way a sound changes when it shifts from background to foreground, when the source of it turns its attention more precisely in your direction. He woke at 5:30 and lay in his four-poster, and felt the shift in thought, today. Then he got up, pulled on his clothes, left his glasses on the nightstand, because for reasons he couldn't articulate precisely, they seemed unnecessary this morning, and went down and out through the main doors into the cold Scottish dark that was just barely beginning, at its eastern edge, to think about becoming morning. The grounds were mist and wet grass and silence. His breath came out white. He was not cold. He should have been jumper and jeans and no cloak, October in Scotland, but the air around him carried a warmth that had no obvious source, a few degrees above where it should have been, localized precisely to the space he occupied. He noticed this and catalogued it and walked toward the water. The lake was still. The mist lay flat on it in long, unhurried panels, as if the water was exhaling slowly. Nothing moved on the surface. Nothing broke the reflection. Harry stood at the edge and looked at the water and let the hum in his sternum expand until it was his whole chest, until it was the ground under his feet, until it was the cold air around him vibrating at the right frequency, and then he looked at the water and the water looked back, not a face. Nothing that had a face not at this moment, more like the quality of the water changing, from indifferent to aware, from surface to depth, from a large quantity of cold Scottish loch to something that had been under this particular loch for longer than Scotland had been Scotland, and had, after a long patience, decided to open its eyes. He reached into his pocket and found the corner of the toast he'd wrapped in a napkin from the previous night and eaten 3/4 of while sitting on his dormitory windowsill watching the lake. He ate the last piece now. He put the napkin back in his pocket. "Hello," he said to the water. The wave came from the deepest center, not a wind wave, nothing superficial. Pulse from the bottom upward, displacing the entire mass of the lake's water in a single, slow, enormous heartbeat that radiated outward in a perfect circle and reached Harry's feet without wetting his shoes. It moved through him instead, arriving as a subsonic vibration that climbed from the soles of his feet through his shins, his spine, the base of his skull, and filled his chest from the inside with a resonance so deep it was more tactile than auditory, more bone than air. It said in no language made of words, "There you are." Harry exhaled once, evenly through his nose. He kept his feet where they were, kept his hands in his pockets. The cold air around him was warm now, fully warm, unmistakably warm, carrying the smell of stone and deep salt and something electrical that had no name in any lexicon he'd encountered, though it would later, much later, map imprecisely to concepts like controlled fission and measured radiation, and the breath of something that runs on the same processes as a star, just slower. The lake's center heaved, not explosively. This was the opposite of explosive. This was massive weight in unhurried motion. This was geological. This was the patience of something that has never once needed to be fast because nothing has ever been in a position to require its speed. The mist rolled back from the central point, displaced not by wind, but by rising mass, by something beneath the surface that was large enough that its emergence changed the atmospheric conditions of the immediate area. And then the spines broke the water, blue-white, dorsal. moving in sequence from the base of what must be an impossible neck down to tail still submerged. A pulse. That was what it was. A moving illumination that traveled down the spine array and back again in something that was almost linguistic, almost grammatical. A syntax made of bioluminescent radiation that was controlled with a precision suggesting intent in a way that no natural phenomenon Harry had ever encountered had suggested intent. The head came up through the water the way a continent comes up from the sea over millennia, except compressed. The skull was the size of a building, the jaw alone the length of a city block, and the water that poured from it fell in sheets, fell in curtains, fell in a quantity that suggested the lake was briefly, dramatically, less full than it had been. And the eyes. He would think about the eyes for years and never fully account for them. They were amber, they were wide-set. They moved with deliberate precision, not the jerky, reactive tracking of an animal startled by motion, but the slow, complete arc of something that already knows where everything is and is choosing where to look. They found him. They stopped. The air pressure changed. This was physical, documentable, if anyone had had a barometer and the presence of mind to look at it. The space around Harry densified with attention, with the specific atmospheric quality of being looked at by something that does not regard looking as casual, for whom attention is itself a force of nature, applied deliberately. The head lowered. This was the thing that later, in the reports that certain individuals wrote and then rewrote and then wrote again, people struggled most to account for. The creature had emerged from the water at a scale that should, by any rational metric, have been followed by territorial behavior, predatory behavior, behavior consistent with the sudden presence of a 200-meter apex organism in proximity to a cluster of small, warm things. Instead, the head lowered, slowly. Over the course of nearly 30 seconds, it lowered, the neck curving, the enormous skull tilting, the jaw coming toward the earth in an arc that was absolutely deliberate, that could not be misread as anything other than what it was, and the jaw came to rest against the Scottish ground 12 feet from where Harry stood, and the amber eyes were at his level, and a warmth like standing stones that had been in the sun since the beginning of everything rolled off the hide in waves. Every bird in the Forbidden Forest went silent at precisely the same moment. One collective inhale held. Harry walked forward. He didn't decide to walk forward in the sense of considering options and selecting one. There was a direction that existed, had always existed. He would think later. The way gravity is a direction. The way downhill is a direction. The way home is a direction before you found it. And the direction was toward, and walking toward it was simply the correct response to the direction existing. He stopped in front of the jaw. He looked at the eye. The eye looked at him. He lifted his hand and placed his palm flat against the side of the jaw, just behind the corner of the mouth, where the plates of the hide overlapped in a geometry that was almost architectural, compressed layers of something denser than bone, all of it carrying in the deep joins between scales a bioluminescence that pulsed in exact time with the dorsal sequence, slow as a sleeping heartbeat, blue-white in the early Scottish morning. The hide under his palm was warm, not animal warm, not the warmth of metabolic fire, warmer and more constant than that, the warmth of something that is itself a heat source, the warmth of rock that has been at the center of a process of controlled, sustained energy output for 65 million years. He felt the vibration travel through his palm immediately, enter his wrist, move up his forearm, occupy his entire arm, and arrive in his chest where it merged with the hum that had been there since Carlyle and they became, briefly, the same note. The vibration said something that was not made of words and was not made of images and arrived instead as pure recognition, the cognitive equivalent of a fact becoming undeniable, and what it said was, you are. Not you are something, not you are important, or you are powerful, or you are the one. Just the fundamental two-word declaration of existence, you are, aimed at him specifically, produced by something that had been calibrated over 65 million years of being the final word on the nature of things, and Harry felt it go into every corner of himself that had been told the opposite. Every corner that had been told, you are nothing, you are less than nothing, you are a burden and an embarrassment and a problem, and something unfortunate that happened to people who didn't deserve it. The vibration moved through those corners the way the tide moves through tidal pools, completely, without hurry, without announcement, filling the shape that was there. Harry stood very still. He pressed his palm flat. He breathed. Above him, the dorsal spines sent their sequence, blue-white, 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 in a pattern that changed now from the breathing rhythm he'd woken to that morning to something more deliberate, more structured, a syntax of pulses moving from neck to tail tip and back and repeating, as though the creature were speaking in a frequency designed to carry over a very large distance. Harry understood, with the same bone-deep certainty he'd understood the direction toward, that this was an announcement. That the thing being announced was him, that the announcement was being sent in all directions, across every distance, on every frequency that old things listened on. From somewhere in the Forbidden Forest, 300 meters roughly northeast, something answered, not the same voice, different register. Higher, faster, carrying a percussion like struck stone, like the impact of something enormous on hard earth at rhythm. Young by whatever standard of age was currently applicable, which put it at perhaps 4 million years old. It answered in its own frequency, and the answer arrived at Harry's feet as a different vibration from the one under his palm, frantic and bright and pointed. Then from the north, something lower even than the jaw under his palm. Something that resonated in a register that was less sound and more physical law, a vibration that you experienced not as sensation, but as the sudden understanding that the earth has a voice and it is agreeing with something. Harry took his hand away from the jaw. He turned around. In 14 of the castle's windows, faces. Still and pale in the early morning light, at too great a distance to read expressions, but present, unmistakably watching. One window in the topmost tower, a figure standing with something in their hands that caught the thin light. Harry looked at those windows for a moment. He thought, he put his hands back in his pockets. He thought, right then, Albus Dumbledore had not been to sleep. He stood at the window of his office with a cup of tea cooling between his palms, and he looked at the boy at the lakeshore and he thought, with a specific precision that had served him through every crisis of his long life, this was not in the plans. It was the truest thought he'd had in some time. In 89 years of planning, careful, layered, long-horizon planning that had outlasted 4 governments and 3 Dark Lords, and one particularly contentious Confederation governance reform, he had grown accustomed to the feeling of being the person in any room who understood the most about what was going to happen. He did not think of this as arrogance. He thought of it as the natural yield of paying attention for longer than everyone else. He had not paid attention to the Black Lake. The creature's dorsal spines pulsed against the morning. Even through glass and stone, the vibration arrived in his chest, not painful but insistent, persistent, the way a very large bell being struck in a nearby room sends its note through walls. Around him, every silver instrument on every surface had ceased its usual spinning and measuring and clicking commentary. He'd checked. Not broken, overwhelmed, filled past capacity by a signal so large that their small calibrated mechanisms had simply stopped in the way gauges stop when the needle goes past the end of the dial. Every instrument pointing in the same direction as his eyes, which were on the boy at the lakeshore. He had known in the abstract, careful, impersonal way one knows difficult mathematics that Harry was significant. Significant in the specific, qualified, carefully bounded way the prophecy defined significance. He had not considered significance in any other sense. He had not considered the possibility that forces older than prophecy might have their own definitions of significance and might not find it necessary to consult his plans before applying them. The tea was cold. He hadn't noticed when. Below, at the water's edge, the boy stood with his palm against the jaw of the largest organism in documented existence, and his face was calm. Not the calm of someone suppressing a response, the calm of someone whose response is, in fact, calm. The calm of someone for whom this has answered something that had previously been a very persistent question. He needed to talk to Harry. Immediately, no, not immediately, carefully, in the right order. He needed to understand the nature of what had just occurred before anyone else had the opportunity to decide they understood it and act on their version. He needed Harry's trust, which he had, he believed, in the general way that students trust headmasters. He needed to ensure that trust remained organized in a useful direction. He reached for his quill, stopped. Held the quill above the parchment. Write to whom, to say what, he put the quill down. He looked at his hands. The entrance hall was loud by breakfast in the specific way it was always loud. 300 students producing 300 individual conversations that merged into a collective hum, punctuated by the sounds of plates and silverware, and 1 or 2 points of laughter sharp enough to cut through. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and ate his porridge and corrected twice the habit of taking less than he wanted. 7 owls, Hermione said, sitting down across from him. She said it the way you say something that hasn't finished resolving into meaning. To the headmaster's office, in under 40 minutes. I counted from the owlery. She paused. The fat friar says every protective ward on the castle activated simultaneously at 6:42 this morning. Harry ate a spoonful of porridge. Which was when you were at the lake, she said. Yes, Harry said. Ron had stopped chewing. Down the table, Percy Weasley was reading a letter and going progressively more pink. Several Hufflepuffs across the hall were leaning into a conversation with the body language of people sharing information they weren't sure they should share. At the staff table, Professor Quirrell's tea was untouched. Professor Snape was eating with methodical precision and looking at nothing in particular, which, Harry had come to understand, was what Snape looked like when he was looking at something very specific and had decided not to appear to be doing so. What happened? Hermione said. Harry thought about how to answer that question accurately and in a way that would produce understanding rather than alarm. Hermione's alarm response was to research obsessively, which was not inherently a problem, but he wasn't sure yet what there was to find. Something came up from the lake, he said. It's large, part of it went back down. He looked at his porridge. It'll come back. He said this without particular inflection, the way you say it's going to rain when you understand weather patterns. Ron said part of it, the rest of it's still in the lake, Harry said. The lake's deep. Hermione opened her mouth. Dumbledore stood at the staff table, and the hall went quiet with the specific, complete speed of a room that has been trained. Good morning. His voice did what it always did, warm, unhurried, faintly delighted by the ongoing project of existence. Scotland's wildlife is, of course, full of wonders. Any questions about last night's natural phenomena should be directed to your head of house, who will enthusiastically explain that the grounds are temporarily restricted and that breakfast is very good today. He sat. The hall spoke again. Harry watched him sit, watched the precise non-direction of his attention, not looking at Harry, deliberate in not looking at Harry, which was itself a species of looking. Harry, Hermione said, low and precise. What did it do? He thought about his palm against the jaw, about the warmth. About the two words that weren't words. It said hello, he said. Dumbledore found him after dinner. The way he always found people. Harry turned a corner and he was there, and the specific quality of the encounter suggested that the corridor had always been going to contain both of them at this moment, that this was less a coincidence than a conclusion. Walk with me, Harry. They walked through corridors. Dumbledore knew the way you know a house you've loved for decades, without looking, without thinking, just moving, the body having internalized the architecture completely. The window on the fourth floor that faced west, the portrait of the sleeping woman. The corridor where the torchlight was always slightly orange rather than yellow, for reasons no one had satisfactorily investigated. Through the west window, the forbidden forest at the edge of dusk, the trees were wrong. Not drastically not fallen or burning, simply differently arranged, as if someone had moved certain of them with great care and considerable purpose, and the trees that remained were still processing this reorganization, still adjusting to a geometry that was not theirs. You were at the lake this morning, Dumbledore said. Yes, alone, before 6. Yes, he walked with his hands clasped behind his back, and his half-moon spectacles caught the torchlight at each fixture they passed, and his voice was doing what his voice did, unhurried, warm, with the measured quality of someone who has extensive experience deploying warmth as a strategic resource, and has, over decades, lost the ability to be entirely sure where the strategy ends and the genuine article begins. What did you feel, he said, when it emerged? Harry considered this with genuine attention. Fear was the expected answer. He assessed for fear and found none. What he found in its place was something he described to Hermione as hello, and that was not quite sufficient, but was pointing in the right direction. Right, he said. Dumbledore's step didn't change. His hands didn't move. The silence that followed lasted approximately 2 seconds, and in it, if you were paying attention, Harry was always paying attention, you could hear something recalibrate. Right, Dumbledore said. Yeah, not frightened. No. They reached the west window and Dumbledore stopped. Below, the grounds were full dark now. The lake was invisible, but the spines were not blue-white above the waterline, that slow pulse, visible as bioluminescence in the complete Scottish dark, steady as a lighthouse signal, and considerably more ancient. That creature, Dumbledore said, and there was something in the phrasing, in the deliberate selection of creature over any other available word, that communicated a man standing carefully next to a fact he'd prefer were less true. Is outside any magical taxonomy we have. It operates on principles we cannot currently measure or predict. He was quiet for a moment. And it chose to present itself to you. Yes, Harry said. Do you understand what that signifies? Harry looked at the spines. In the forest, something was moving. He couldn't see it, but he felt it in the way you feel thunder before it arrives, in the subsonic ahead of the audible, a different frequency from the one in the lake. Faster, avian. Moving toward the school from the deep interior of the forest. It means it chose me, Harry said. 3 full seconds. Dumbledore's silences were structural, weight-bearing. Harry, the warmth was present, engineered or genuine. It was present, and it was being applied with deliberate care. I want you to be careful. You are 11 years old. You are at the beginning of your education. These creatures, whatever relationship they appear to have formed with you, they are not part of any framework we understand. A pause. Magic has rules, limits. What occurred this morning is something I cannot yet categorize, and I have been categorizing dangerous things for a very long time. The pause was different this time, not rhetorical, something that wanted filling. I need you to come to me first, before you go to the lake again, before you make any decisions about how this relationship might develop. Harry looked at him. The eyes above the half-moon spectacles were very blue, very still, completely attentive, and underneath the attention, as visible to Harry as the structure under the ornamental plaster, was a man who needed, specifically and urgently, to be the person who decided what this meant. Harry had heard sentences like this before, from a less impressive speaker, in a much smaller house before the door of an inadequate space. The words were different, but the architecture was the same. "I need to be the one who decides." "Okay," Harry said. And he watched the tension in Dumbledore's shoulders, invisible to most people presumably, but Harry had spent 11 years reading the bodies of people who held power over him, eased slightly, with something that looked like relief. Harry said nothing else. He went to bed. At 2:30 in the morning, he stood at the lake's edge in the dark. No cloak, no wand. His jumper with the tear in the left cuff and his jeans, and his trainers on the wet Scottish grass. The castle behind him was dark except for 2 windows, one in the astronomy tower. One in the topmost tower that Harry had learned was the headmaster's office, where a light burned with the steady quality of a light that had been on for a long time. He looked at the lake. The spines pulsed blue-white. The air around him was warm. The hum in his sternum was very clear, very present, directional and clean as a tuning fork struck once and held. He placed both palms flat against the jaw that was already lowering to meet him. The warmth under his hands was constant. The vibration was immediate, complex, a chord of immense depth that entered through his palms and occupied his chest entirely. There you are, there you are, there you are, a rhythm as old as tidal patterns, as reliable as plate tectonics, saying the same thing it had said at dawn, and meaning it with the same absolute, uncomplicated geological certainty. Harry leaned his forehead against the warm hide. He stayed like that for a long time. From the Forbidden Forest, 3 answers at 3 distinct frequencies, the avian, the tectonic, one more he hadn't felt before, wide and deep and coming from the northeast, from out beyond the edge of Scotland entirely, still hours away, answering, coming. The king had spoken in a frequency that carried across every distance old things listened on. His court had heard, his court was coming. Chapter 2, the court assembles by morning. The Forbidden Forest was different, not subtly. Not the way forests change with seasons, slow, incremental, the kind of change you notice only in retrospect, in the gap between how you remember a thing and how it currently is. This was visible. This was the difference between a room before and after furniture is moved. The same walls, the same floor, entirely reconfigured according to a principle of organization that had not previously applied. Trees that had stood in particular relationship to one another for 3 centuries were no longer in that relationship. They had been relocated, not snapped, not uprooted with violence, moved, with a care that suggested tremendous mass applied at very low speed by something for which the structural integrity of the trees was a consideration, rather than an obstacle. The point had been to clear space. The cleared space occupied several acres in the forest's deepest interior, closest to the lake shore, and it was floored now with compacted earth and the dark, rich smell of displaced root systems and overturned soil. In this space, 2 presences, 2 arrangements of mass that made the word nest feel like pointing at the Himalayas with a finger and calling it a hill. The first was low and broad, settled against the western edge of the clearing, in a posture that suggested it had arrived at rest, with the patience of something that understood rest as a permanent possibility, rather than a temporary interruption of movement. Its surface was not feathers in any sense that ornithology had prepared vocabulary for, more like carbonized plates, each one slightly translucent at the edge, arranged in overlapping fans that caught what pale morning light filtered through the canopy and returned it as iridescence, shifting at the color boundary between bronze and the deep orange of embers. It was breathing. You could tell by the way the nearest trees moved, in a slow, rhythmic backwash of displaced air. The second had positioned itself in the northwest corner of the cleared space, with what appeared to be 3 mature oaks serving as a headrest. The oaks were still standing. They were now functioning as furniture. The thing that had decided this about them was angular, narrow at the extremities and massive at the center, and it was watching the castle with both eyes from a distance that made the castle look like a detailed model of itself. Every owl in the owlery had pressed to the interior wall furthest from the forest, and was making sounds that owls did not make in Harry's experience of them, which was admittedly limited, but sufficient to identify that the register of the sounds was not normal. Hedwig sat on the dormitory windowsill. She was watching the forest. Her orange eyes moved at a steady interval, tracking, confirming, tracking again, with the calm of something that has assessed a situation and found it, on balance, acceptable. Harry sat on his bed and ate the last of a chocolate frog, and watched the forest through the window, and did not taste the chocolate at all. "You knew?" Hermione said. She was standing in the doorway. She'd been to the owlery, he could tell from the set of her shoulders, the particular posture of someone who went looking for information and came back carrying more of it than was entirely comfortable. Ron's curtains were still closed. Neville had surfaced briefly, looked out the window at the forest, said, "Oh no," with the weary precision of someone confirming a suspicion they'd harbored and hoped was wrong, and returned to his bed with his pillow arranged over his face. "I felt them coming," Harry said. "It's different." "How is it different?" He considered the question properly. Knowing is a choice you make about something. Feeling them coming was just information that arrived without asking permission. Hermione processed this the way she processed everything, completely, seriously, with the full weight of someone who takes information as seriously as anyone Harry had ever met. What are they? He looked at the forest. The broad, low presence near the western edge shifted in its sleep. He could feel the shift through the dormitory floor, a faint vibration that traveled through the stone in the wood and arrived in his feet as a tactile fact. "Old," he said, "very old. I don't think there's a category for them in anything we have." "Hermione," he said after a moment. "Have you ever known something was true before you understood why?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "When I was 9, she said, I decided mathematics was going to be important before I could have told you why." A pause. "Are you telling me to trust a feeling?" "The feeling is the information," he said. "The explanation comes after." She looked at him for a time, then crossed the room and stood beside him at the window, and they stood there while the forest breathed its new breath, while the trees at the cleared space's edge leaned almost imperceptibly away from the things they were now sharing ground with. "What do they want?" she said. "To be here," Harry said. "For now that's enough." She looked at the forest for another moment, then went to find her copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, which Harry knew from watching her face would not contain anything useful, but which she would need to consult anyway because that was how she handled the gap between what she knew and what she needed to know. Snape had slept for 2 hours, which was not unusual for him, and had spent the remaining nighttime hours in his office with a cold cup of tea and 3 texts on thaumaturgical resonance theory that he had not opened since graduate study. He opened them now. He read with the focused, joyless efficiency of someone who is looking for a specific thing and is fully prepared to be disappointed by what they find. What he found was insufficient. The resonance theory, the hypothesis, 3 centuries old, academically respected in the abstract and practically useless in the specific, that true magical aptitude was frequency rather than capacity, had been developed in the context of human magic. The text did not address what happened when the frequency in question was apparently also the operating register of organisms that had been extant since the Jurassic. Closed the texts, he went to Dumbledore's office. Dumbledore had not slept either. The difference was that Dumbledore showed it differently, not in the texture of his presence but in the subtler metrics, the tea on the wrong side of the desk, the fireplace showing the ash pattern of multiple international flu calls, the instruments on the shelves all spinning in the same wrong direction. Dumbledore was sitting with his hands together on the desk, and his eyes on the window, and the expression on his face was the one Snape had seen perhaps 4 times in 20 years, the expression of a man who has planned at extraordinary length and depth, and is currently experiencing the specific, vertiginous sensation of the plan becoming insufficient. "The minister," Dumbledore said, before Snape had closed the door, "was flued at 7 this morning. By myself preemptively, before his own monitoring team could provide their version." A pause. "He is extremely concerned." "Cornelius Fudge," Snape said, "is concerned by critical letters in the Prophet. I imagine this has rather exceeded his processing capacity. The Confederation's monitoring division will already have alerts." Dumbledore's voice was as measured as it always was. "But the subordinate clauses were shorter this morning. The sentences were working harder, carrying more, with less decoration. Your extraordinary threat assessment protocols are automatic above a certain magnitude of anomalous activity. I would estimate 2 days before a delegation." Snape sat. He looked at Dumbledore. He thought about what Dumbledore was not saying, which was that 2 days was the window, 2 days to establish the narrative before other people arrived to establish their own version of it. "What do you want from me?" he said. "Watch the boy. If a natural opening presents itself, speak with him." "Tell me what you observe." Snape absorbed this. "You want me to surveil an 11-year-old. I want to understand what we are dealing with." "You want," Snape said, with the precision of a man selecting words that are accurate rather than comfortable, "to know how much of it you can still manage." Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were very clear. "Yes," he said, and it was one of the rare times Dumbledore simply said yes to a difficult thing without architectural elaboration, and Snape found the plainness of it more unsettling than any amount of grandfatherly framing would have been. He stood, smoothed his robes. At the door he stopped. "The creature in the lake," he said, "the one that chose the boy specifically, does it sleep?" "I don't believe so." "Then whatever it communicated at the lakeshore yesterday morning is already written," Snape said. You cannot go back before it. The question is not how to manage the boy. The question is how to present something that is already a fact before people with less imagination than you and considerably more institutional authority arrive to present it themselves. He paused. I suggest moving quickly. He left. Dumbledore picked up his quill, set it down, picked it up again. Snape found Harry at 11 o'clock crossing the entrance courtyard at an angle that, plotted forward, terminated at the lakeshore. Potter. Harry stopped, turned. He was not wearing his glasses, which Snape noted and did not yet assign meaning to. In the October light, his eyes were an extremely specific shade of green that had, Snape had always believed, the wrong effect on him, and that he had always attributed to the biographical coincidence of parentage. He was less certain of that attribution this morning than he had been yesterday. The grounds are restricted, Snape said. Harry looked at him. The look was not defiant, not the manufactured defiance of students who have thought through their position and committed to it, something quieter. Closer to a question from someone who already knows the question is theoretical. Are they? Harry said. Snape considered what Dumbledore had asked him to do, considered what Dumbledore had said about natural openings, considered the 2 texts on resonance theory sitting on his desk, considered the vibration he could feel in his sternum even here, 70 meters from the lakeshore, a low and constant pressure that was not uncomfortable and was not something he could ignore. Walk, he said. They walked. Snape fell into step beside the boy without deciding to, which was its own category of information, and they crossed the grounds in the thin, pewter light. The closer they got to the water, the warmer the air became, not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm someone who wasn't paying attention, but in increments of perhaps half a degree per 10 meters, steady and sourceable to the direction of the lake. Snape was always paying attention. What does it communicate to you? He said. Harry was quiet for long enough that Snape had begun to revise his expectation of an answer. Then it doesn't use words or images. He paused. He was trying to find accurate language for something that had not required language before, and Snape, who spent a considerable amount of his professional life doing exactly that, recognized the quality of the effort. It's more like when something just is, and being near it tells you things, like gravity. Gravity doesn't explain itself, you're just in it. Snape thought about thaumaturgical resonance, thought about the hypothesis's central claim, that the rarest frequencies were those that matched the resonant signature of the world's oldest sources of power, that a magical being calibrated to such a frequency would not experience proximity to those sources as external sensation, but as something closer to recognition, an internal fact becoming externally confirmed. What does it tell you? He said. Right now. Harry glanced at him sideways. That you're thinking harder than you want me to know. Snape stopped walking. The boy stopped and looked at him, with an expression that was doing nothing except existing on his face, which was somehow the most complete expression of its type Snape had encountered. He had known academically, in the statistical, impersonal way one knows difficult things before they have personal consequences, that Harry Potter was unusual. He had declined, until recently, to know it in any other register. Go to the lake, Snape said. I'll be at a distance sufficient for institutional deniability. Something shifted briefly in Harry's face, not a smile. The awareness of a concession being made and the choice not to make anything of it. Professor, Harry said. Don't, Snape said. Harry went. Snape stood 40 feet back and watched the jaw come to meet the boy from the water, and watched the boy place both palms against the hide without adjusting his stride, and felt the subsonic register of what passed between them as a vibration in his own chest, arriving in his sternum like someone pressing a single key on the lowest octave of a very large pipe organ and holding it. He watched this for some time. He went back to his office and opened the resonance texts again, and this time read them differently, with the specific attention of someone who is no longer searching for a category, but attempting to understand the dimensions of something that does not have one. The delegation arrived at noon on the second day. Harry knew before any owl came, because the vibration from the lake changed register, not volume, not urgency, but direction, the way a searchlight changes quality when it turns from background sweep to targeted lock. He was eating lunch, fork halfway to his mouth when it happened, and he put the fork down. Ron, who had over 2 days developed what he called Harry Sense and Hermione called basic pattern recognition, put his fork down a half second later. Something's happening. Something's coming, Harry said. Can you tell what? Harry thought about how to describe the quality of the shift. People, he said. Official people. He picked up his fork again. They'll be here in an hour. They were there in 50 minutes. 2 ministry cars through the main gate, a choice communicating either a fundamental misreading of the situation or a deliberate insistence on the grammar of normality. On the vocabulary of this is a manageable situation, and we are the people who manage it. 5 figures emerged, and Hermione, who had appeared at Harry's shoulder with her copy of a history of wizarding governance already open to the index, identified them in a running murmur. Aldrich Pembroke, Senior Undersecretary to the International Confederation's Council of 13, two officials from his office, and she paused here, Directress Isolde Margox, French Ministry Representative to the Confederation's Extraordinary Threat Assessment Committee, and a fifth figure whose name did not appear in anything she had with her. Harry watched them cross the entrance courtyard from the window above the entrance hall staircase. Pembroke walked the way men walk when they have been told repeatedly that they look authoritative and have decided to take this seriously. His Confederation pendant caught the flat October light. His gray traveling cloak had been pressed with a spell, so precise the fabric's geometry was architectural. Behind him, Margox moved differently, not performing anything, just moving, watching everything with the specific quality of attention that precedes accurate assessment. Harry went down to the entrance hall, not because he'd been invited, because the entrance hall was where they were going, and the entrance hall was part of the school, and the school was where he lived, and he was not going to stand behind a window while people arrived in his space to have conversations about him. Ron came, Hermione came. They took positions against the wall, not flanking exactly, not deliberately. It had simply evolved without discussion into a formation, the way certain things become formations through shared understanding rather than instruction. Dumbledore met the delegation at the door with the warmth of a man who has prepared his warmth and applied it at the correct moment. The delegation was admitted, introductions occurred. Pembroke's eyes moved across the entrance hall with the cataloging efficiency of an official doing threat assessment, and they found Harry on the fourth sweep, later than they should have, which told Harry something about Pembroke's expectations. "You're Harry Potter," Pembroke said. "Yes," Harry said. Pembroke looked at him with the specific expression of someone encountering a fact that does not match their operational model. He had expected probably something more dramatic, someone visibly exceptional, not a boy in a school jumper with a tear in the left cuff standing against a wall eating nothing. "You are aware," Pembroke said, "that the entities currently resident on these grounds represent an extraordinary threat to the statute of secrecy. That the lake anomaly alone is visible under certain atmospheric conditions from the A9 highway. That 3 Muggle hikers on the Benlowers approach filed reports with Highland Council yesterday describing what they characterized as." He produced a small parchment from inside his cloak and read from it with the expression of someone who finds the document personally offensive, a large glowing fin. "That the statute exists specifically to," the floor moved. Everyone in the entrance hall moved with it except Harry. Single deep pulse, traveling up through the castle's foundations, through the flagstones, through the soles of their feet, lasting perhaps 3 seconds and ending with a completeness that made the silence after it very clean. The suits of armor rattled, the chandelier swayed. A portrait of a 17th century arithmancer fell from the wall 2 corridors away with a crash that echoed back to them. Pembroke had gone white, not pale, the white of someone whose nervous system has made a unilateral decision about what the current situation requires and has begun redirecting blood accordingly. His 2 officials had taken a synchronized step backward. The unnamed 5th member of the delegation had placed a hand on the wall. Directress Margox had not moved. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was doing something that Harry watched with genuine respect. It was working, the full, active application of a powerful and practiced will to the task of maintaining composure in the presence of something that did not fit any category her composure had been designed to manage. She was succeeding. Barely, but with real effort, and Harry found the effort more impressive than effortless composure would have been. The hum in his sternum was level. The pulse had been aimed at him, not warning, not threat, something closer to "I am here, I hear what is being said, I am paying attention to who is paying attention to you." He felt it as confirmation. That, Pembroke said, with a voice missing several of its original qualities, was. "The lake," Harry said. Pembroke's mouth stayed open for a moment. "The lake," he said. "He hears at a different frequency range than you're probably used to." Harry looked at Pembroke. "He heard what you were saying," Dumbledore said. "Harry, he's not a threat to the statute," Harry said. "He's been in this lake for 60 million years, and nobody outside this school has formally acknowledged his existence. He doesn't want to be acknowledged. He stopped. He felt the pulse from the lake again, not another floor-shaking physical transmission, but a vibration in his sternum, specific and clear. "He wants me to be left alone," Harry said. "Those are related, but they're not the same thing." The entrance hall was extremely quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that had shed approximately 40% of its usual warmth, not cold, but simplified, reduced to the functional load-bearing components, because the decorative elements required energy that was currently in use elsewhere. Pembroke said, with the specific effort of a man reconstructing his authority from available materials, "I'd like to see the lakeshore." "I'll take you," Harry said. He took them outside without waiting for Dumbledore's agreement, which was not a calculation so much as a fact. He walked through the main doors and across the grounds in the pewter October afternoon, and the 5-member delegation followed him, which they would each, individually, find difficult to explain in their subsequent reports. Dumbledore came because not coming would have conceded the encounter entirely. Snape materialized from somewhere. Harry had not seen him join, and could not account for the moment of his arrival, only the fact of his presence at the left edge of the group, far enough removed from Dumbledore to maintain independence, close enough to observe everything. The closer they got to the water, the warmer the air became. Harry felt the change behind him, not heard, felt, through the subsonic register that had become as natural to him as hearing. Pembroke's breathing went shallow at the 30-meter mark. One of the identical officials stopped walking entirely at 25 and had to be prompted by the other. Margox kept pace with Harry until she didn't, falling back 2 steps at 15 meters, which Harry registered without turning around. He stopped at the water's edge. The lake was still, flat. The dorsal spines above the surface pulsed their slow, steady blue-white sequence, visible in the gray afternoon light as something bioluminescent and ancient, and completely unconcerned with the fact that it was being observed. "Come up," Harry said, quietly, the way you say come in to someone who's knocked, expecting compliance not because you're commanding but because you're certain of the relationship. The pulse moved through the earth under his feet before it was visible on the water's surface. That upward motion, from depth to surface, transmitted through the substrate of the entire lakeshore, entering everyone present through the soles of their feet at the same moment, but interpreted differently depending on the nervous system receiving it. For Harry, information, warmth, recognition. For the others, something for which they did not have a word, but that operated on their bodies with complete authority. The water heaved. The spines cleared the surface fully, all of them, the complete dorsal array, and then the neck, and then the head, rising with that geological patience, that mass in unhurried motion, water falling in volumes that reduced the lake's level by a measurable fraction. Against the pewter sky, the skull was overwhelming, not merely large, but spatially dominant in a way that bent perspective, that made the available space seem less than it had been, that made the castle behind them look like a sketch of something rather than the thing itself. The amber eyes found Harry. Behind him, Pembroke made a sound, not a word, the head lowered. That great deliberate arc, neck curving, skull tilting, the jaw coming toward the earth with the same absolute, unmistakable deliberateness it had used on Sunday morning, no ambiguity possible in the interpretation of the movement, every observer in every frame of reference receiving the same information. This is chosen. This is intentional. This is the gesture of something that knows what it is doing and has decided to do it. The jaw met the earth. The amber eyes settled at Harry's level. The warmth rolled off the hide in long, constant waves. The subsonic vibration traveled through the earth and entered everyone present simultaneously, but arrived only for Harry, arriving as there you are in that frequency made of physical law rather than language, the 2-word declaration that had been true since the first morning, and was no less true now in front of witnesses. Harry looked at Pembroke. Pembroke was looking at the jaw on the ground, at the scale of one tooth. He was doing the work of processing something that did not fit in any previous framework with the tools that previous frameworks had provided, which were insufficient, and he knew they were insufficient, and knowing that was itself a new kind of information about the limits of his position. "Mr. Pembroke," Harry said. Pembroke's eyes moved from the jaw to Harry. The motion required visible effort. "He's been called Godzilla," Harry said. "In some records, I found it in a history." He turned to look at the amber eyes. "He's older than the Ministry, older than Hogwarts, older than the statute. He's been here for 60 million years and no Muggle has noticed because he's never been interested in being noticed." He looked back at Pembroke. "He's not here because I asked him. He came because he recognized something. That's done. It happened. You can't go back before it." "The Confederation," Pembroke said, and his voice was doing its best. His voice was genuinely trying to carry its usual authority. "Cannot simply, there are protocols, there are procedures for extraordinary biological." "Your protocols," Harry said, "work on things that fit in your category system." He said it without heat, without contempt. "Factually, the way you say your umbrella won't work in this. It's not rain, not unkind, just accurate." Pembroke looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at Harry with the expression Snape had clocked 2 days ago, the transparent one, the one that had gotten past the performance, not fear exactly, but the thing adjacent to it that arrives when a man who has been the cleverest person in every room he's entered for 60 years walks into a room that has stopped organizing itself around that. "He chose me," Harry said, "to neither of them specifically and to both of them precisely. I don't entirely know why yet, but it happened, and other things have come because it happened, and they're in the forest now, and they're going to stay." He looked at Pembroke and at Margox, who was standing at 20 feet with her hands at her sides and her face doing that impressive, effortful thing. "The statute is your concern, I understand that, but you're not going to solve it by moving me." The floor of the earth moved again, single pulse, 6 seconds, then silence so clean you could have cut it. Margox said, "Aldrich." Everyone looked at her. "The child is correct," she said. Her English was exact, the precision of someone who uses a second language with more care than most people use their first. "This is not a security situation. Security situations have perimeters and we control the perimeters." She looked at the jaw on the earth, at the amber eyes, at the dorsal spine still pulsing blue-white above the lake. "This is a sovereignty situation. The entities have designated a sovereign. The sovereign is 11 years old and attends school in Scotland, and the Confederation has no established protocol for this circumstance, because we designed our protocols around the assumption that sovereignty of this kind was a historical artifact." She looked at Pembroke. "It is not a historical artifact. It is currently on the lakeshore." Pembroke said, "He is a child." "Yes," Margox said, "with a retinue from the Jurassic. What is your specific proposal, Aldrich? Not in principle, specifically." "What will you do?" The question sat in the air between them. The lake was still. The spines pulsed. From the forest came, distantly, the sound of something enormous shifting its weight, and the trees at the forest's edge moved with the backwash, and several students on the castle's outer walls who had gathered to watch from a distance took a collective step back. Pembroke said nothing. "Take time," Margox said. "Think of something adequate." She turned to Harry and inclined her head, not quite a bow, the precise gesture of someone choosing formality not from convention but from genuine assessment. "Monsieur Potter." "You will speak again." "Okay," Harry said. From the forest, the sound began in the root systems. You felt it there first, in the earth, that fast avian frequency Harry had recognized on Sunday morning at the lakeshore, higher and more percussive than Godzilla's register, climbing through the compacted soil and arriving in the soles of everyone's feet as a vibration carrying the specific energy signature of something young and very fast and extremely large in motion. Trees at the northwestern edge of the forest moved, not swaying, parting, the way a curtain parts when something comes through from the other side, except the curtain was 200-year-old Scots pines, and the thing coming through them had the wingspan, Hermione would later estimate from multiple observation points and 3 different reference texts, of a commercial aircraft and the structural organization of nothing she had found in any taxonomy living or extinct. Cleared the tree line low and fast and banked hard to avoid the castle's north tower, a turn performed with an accuracy and spatial awareness that made the avoidance look contemptuous rather than careful, as though the castle had been assessed and found geometrically manageable. And it came in for landing in the cleared space at the forest's edge, with its wings folding on the final approach, and the impact of its landing traveling through the earth as a shockwave that knocked 3 students off the outer wall they'd been standing on and into the grass below, unhurt, lying there looking at the sky. Carbonized plate feathers settled, the head turned. The eyes not amber, these, but a deep iridescent black that contained, when the thin light hit them at certain angles, the complete spectrum refracted outward from the pupil like an oil slick containing a galaxy, found Harry across 400 meters of open ground and fixed. Harry raised a hand. The creature stilled, completely, instantly, the way things still when they receive a signal from something they recognize as the correct source of signals. On the outer wall, Ron Weasley said, in a voice carrying the tone of someone who has found the appropriate response and committed to it fully, "Oh hell." Hermione, beside him with both hands gripping the parapet, said nothing, which was more alarming than anything Ron could have said. From the north grounds, a sound like the bedrock of Scotland expressing an opinion. Second ground presence, the one Harry had felt as angular and deliberate, announced itself not by emerging from the forest, but by surfacing through the earth on the north shore of the lake, pushing upward through the soil and stone with the unhurried certainty of something for which solid matter is a medium rather than a barrier. Surface slowly, the way a submarine surfaces, except the water in this case was rock, and the submarine was the size of several city blocks arranged in an angular, attenuated silhouette that was all deliberate angles and narrow extremities, and a mass at the center that moved with the specific patience of something that has never needed to hurry. Hairline fractures spread across 60 feet of the castle's north face as it surfaced, the stone responding to the vibration of the emergence, and then the fractures stopped, the emergence complete, the stone adjusting, the new balance establishing itself. Pembroke looked at the cracks in the wall. He looked at the thing on the north shore. He looked at Harry. "How many?" he said. Harry felt the vibrations, the lake, the forest, the north shore, and beyond the perceptible horizon, something still coming from the northeast, slower and wider and carrying a frequency so low it registered not as sound or vibration, but as a kind of pressure change in the atmospheric column above them, as though something very large was displacing air at altitude. "More," he said. Pembroke's officials had, between them, taken 6 steps backward and were now standing in a configuration that suggested a strong unconscious preference for returning to London. "Albus," Pembroke said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "What?" Pembroke started again. "How do we?" stopped again. Snape, from the left edge of the group, said, "We go inside. We have tea. We have a conversation that does not require us to shout over the sound of geological activity." He paused. "The boy will join us," not a question, not directed at Dumbledore, directed at the situation as a statement of what the situation required. Harry looked at Snape. "Professor," Harry said. I did not say anything that requires acknowledgement, Snape said. They went inside. Dumbledore's office held all of them with difficulty. Not spatially, the office was generous, but atmospherically, the specific difficulty of 7 people in a room where the power dynamics have been completely redistributed and no one has agreed on the new arrangement. The silver instruments were spinning in the wrong direction. Dumbledore was pretending not to notice. Fawkes, on his perch, was watching Harry with his head tilted at an angle that suggested he was processing something that did not fit his previous model of how things worked. Pembroke had recovered. Not fully, the color was back in his face, but sitting differently, occupying the skin with less confidence than it had this morning, like paint that hasn't fully dried. He had his important statement ready. Harry could tell from the posture, the particular squaring of shoulders that precedes the deployment of authority. The Confederation's position, Pembroke said, is unambiguous. The statute of secrecy is the founding principle of our governance. Whatever connection exists between you and these entities, it cannot be permitted to develop in a manner that exposes the wizarding world. The Muggle hikers alone represent a liability that— I'll speak to him, Harry said. Pembroke stopped. About the Muggles, Harry said, I'll ask him to be less visible during clear weather from the road. He looked at Pembroke. He'll understand. He's been doing this for 60 million years. He doesn't want attention either. Pembroke blinked. You'll ask it. Him, Harry said. You'll ask him. Yes, Harry paused. It'll work. You can have someone monitor the A9 sightings. He looked at Margox. Is that useful? Margox looked at him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, all of them controlled. It would address the immediate statute concern, she said. Then do it, Pembroke said, turning to one of his officials, who produced a parchment with the speed of someone who has been waiting to be useful. And the children at this school, Pembroke said, turning back, have been exposed to extraordinary danger. These creatures on the grounds in the forest, the potential for incidents. There won't be incidents, Harry said. You can't know. There won't be incidents, Harry said again, with the same tone, the same flat certainty. He was not raising his voice. He was not performing certainty. He simply had it, and it occupied the space that raised voices and performed certainty would have otherwise needed. Pembroke looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore said carefully, Harry, I think what Mr. Pembroke is trying to understand is the nature of your authority over these entities, whether it's reliable, consistent. Whether there are conditions under which it might fail, Harry said. Dumbledore said, yes. Harry thought about this genuinely. He thought about the hum in his sternum and the quality of the recognition at the lakeshore, and the way the avian thing had stilled the instant he raised his hand. He thought about whether authority was even the right word, whether command and obedience was the model anyone in this room thought it was. It's not like a spell, he said. I don't control them. They're not controlled. He looked at the window, at the spines pulsing in the gray afternoon. It's more like they're here because they chose to be here. They recognize something. And as long as that recognition holds, he paused, nobody's going to get hurt. That's not a promise I'm making, it's just what's true. The window cracked. A single hairline fracture, lower left corner to midpoint of the upper edge. The crack appeared not with a sound, but with a quality of silence changing, the way silence changes when something has just decided something. Through the cracked window, the dorsal spines pulsed. Once, twice, 3 times, not the breathing rhythm, something more pointed, a cadence that entered through the stone walls and the carpet and the upholstery of every chair and said, in the register below language, in the frequency every nervous system in the room could receive whether they wanted to or not, no, just no. Complete, geological, utterly uninterested in negotiation. The parchment Pembroke's official had been writing on tore down the middle, cleanly, as if a very precise finger had run down the center of it. That, Pembroke said, looking at the cracked window, was in response to what I said. Yes, Harry said. It understood me. He understood the intention, Harry said. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't need to. Pembroke looked at Dumbledore with the expression of a man who has arrived to solve a problem and discovered that the problem's shape is completely different from the shape he brought his tools for. Dumbledore looked back with the expression, transparent again, Snape noted, still transparent, of a man who recognizes that look, because he has been the person wearing it for approximately 12 hours now. Margox said perhaps a recess. The recess happened in a sitting room off the main corridor while Dumbledore sent for tea that nobody drank. Harry stood at the window and looked at the forest and felt the 3 presences on the grounds in the fourth, still distant, still coming from the northeast, and he thought about what Dumbledore had said, come to me first, let me decide the shape of it, and thought about Margox's word, sovereignty. He turned the word over. It was not a word he'd used about himself. It was not a word in the vocabulary of someone who had lived in a cupboard for 10 years, who had eaten what he was given, and worn what he was given and been in the places he was assigned to, who had learned very early that the question of what you wanted was irrelevant to the question of what you got. The hum in his sternum said something. Not words, it never used words, but in the way that information arrived through the frequency, through the physical fact of it, he received something that was approximately, you always were. This is not new, this is recognition of something that has always been true. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Below, in the courtyard, Pembroke's two officials, who had gone outside and were standing in a configuration suggesting they very much wanted to be walking toward a ministry car. One of them was looking at the forest and had not looked away in several minutes. The door opened behind him. Dumbledore, Harry straightened, didn't turn. Harry. His voice had changed, not in character, still the same voice but in density. Some of the load-bearing ornamentation was gone. The sentences that followed were shorter, more direct, more tired. I owe you a conversation, a more honest one than I've managed. Harry turned. Dumbledore was standing in the doorway. He looked, for the first time in Harry's acquaintance with him, his age, not frail, not diminished, but complete, the way things are complete when they are no longer hiding the weight they carry. The Dursleys, Dumbledore said, I placed you there because of blood protection, a ward tied to your mother's sacrifice, activated by living with her blood relation. It was the safest option I had available. He paused. I chose the safest option without knowing what I was placing you in. That is the truth of it. Harry looked at him. I want to protect you, Dumbledore said. I've wanted that since the night I left you at their door. It has complicated itself over time with other considerations. I am aware that the complications have not always served you. He stopped. I'm telling you this because you're not a problem I'm trying to manage. I recognize today that I've sometimes operated as though you were. Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about the letter in the pillowcase, about 9 copies of the same letter coming through the chimney and under the door and through the mail slot at 3 in the morning. About the way the seal had looked in the thin light of the cupboard, an H, a badger, a snake, an eagle, a lion. I know you want to protect me, Harry said. I think you're probably very good at protecting people. He looked at Dumbledore's hands, at the long fingers, at the half-moon spectacles that caught the gray windowlight. I think you're better at it when you don't need to control the shape of it. Dumbledore was silent. I'm not going to disappear, Harry said. I'm going to be here, at school, going to classes and doing homework and eating breakfast. He paused. And they're going to be in the forest and the lake. And that's what it is, you can work with that or around it. He looked at him. I'd rather you worked with it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time with the transparent expression, the one that had got past the performance, the one that was just a man, old and very tired, standing in a room that had reorganized itself around new physics. Yes, Dumbledore said, quiet, direct, just yes. Harry nodded. He looked back out the window at the forest. There's one more coming, he said. From the northeast, it'll arrive tonight. He paused. It's big, even by, he gestured, a small motion encompassing the general situation. You should probably tell the students, not what it is, just that there'll be a sound. Dumbledore said, what kind of sound? Harry thought about the frequency. The low, wide, atmospheric vibration of something approaching at altitude from the northeast, ancient beyond the standards being used here, which was considerable. Tell them, Harry said, that the ground will shake, just once, and then it will stop. Dumbledore told them at dinner. He stood and said that the school's remarkable natural surroundings would, tonight, produce a seismic event of brief duration, fully expected, fully monitored, nothing requiring alarm, and that students were to remain in their common rooms after 9 o'clock. He said it with his usual warm authority. Several students nodded. Several looked at Harry, who was eating his shepherd's pie and not looking at anyone. Hermione, beside him, said very quietly, How big? Big, Harry said. Bigger than? She made a small motion toward the window, toward the forest. Yes, Harry said. She put down her fork, picked it back up, and ate 2 more bites with the careful, mechanical quality of someone who is processing something and using the familiar physical act as anchor. Are you all right? She said. He considered the question honestly. He was eating dinner. His scar was quiet. The hum in his sternum was steady and level and warm and pointing in all directions at once, which was new. It had always been directional before, toward the lake, toward the forest. Now it was omnidirectional, the way a heartbeat is omnidirectional, coming from the center outward. Yeah, he said. She looked at him. She was doing the thing she did when she was deciding whether a response was sufficient, running it against every available metric. Apparently it passed. Okay, she said and picked up her shepherd's pie again. At 9:20, the ground shook. 1 pulse, 11 seconds. A vibration that entered through the foundations of the entire castle simultaneously and climbed through every wall and floor and ceiling, that set the windows resonating in their frames and knocked several things off shelves in the potions classroom, and caused every instrument in Dumbledore's office to stop spinning for the duration and start again when it was over. In the Great Hall, where most of the students had gathered anyway despite the instruction to go to common rooms, every candle flame in every candelabra bent simultaneously in the same direction, northeast, and then returned to vertical when the pulse ended. Then silence. Clean, complete, the silence of something that has arrived. Harry felt it settle, the 5th frequency, the new presence, taking its place in the arrangement. Wide and deep and old and utterly settled, occupying the space north of the forest with the permanence of something that had decided this was where it was, and that was the entirety of the conversation. In the Great Hall, nobody spoke for approximately 10 seconds. Then Percy Weasley said, in a voice stripped of its usual prefectorial certainty, that everyone should please go to their dormitories, and everyone went, which was notable because Percy had never previously achieved this level of compliance. Harry went outside at 11. No one stopped him. He walked through the main doors and across the grounds in the November dark, his breath white, the air carrying that warmth that followed him now everywhere on the grounds, not everywhere in the castle but everywhere outside, as if the outdoor air had been recalibrated to account for his presence in it. He sat with his back against Godzilla's foreleg on the north shore of the lake. The foreleg was as wide as a mature oak and warm with that deep, constant heat. The plates of the hide were rough against his jumper. The ozone smell surrounded him, clean and electrical and very old. Above him, the dorsal spines pulsed blue-white slowly, the breathing rhythm, and the light from them was sufficient to see by if he'd wanted to see anything, which he didn't particularly. He wasn't looking at anything. He was leaning. He was 11 years old. He had told the International Confederation of Wizards that he was not going to be contained, and had watched a man's authority become momentarily irrelevant when the ground spoke. He had told Dumbledore that he would rather they worked together than around each other. He had eaten his shepherd's pie and done his homework and gone to bed in a four-poster that was his. He leaned against the warm hide and heard the 5 frequencies around him, the lake's depth, the forest's breadth, the north shore's stillness, the new presence's width, and one more he realized he was hearing now for the first time, his own. His own frequency, which had always been there, which the hum in his sternum had always been tracing, bouncing off the others and returning to him, showing him his own outline, not small, not alone. From the forbidden forest, the avian presence shifting in its nest, adjusting, settling. From the north, the angular thing perfectly still, keeping watch in the dark. From the northeast, the new arrival breathing slowly, its breath moving the treetops at the forest's edge in long, slow pulses. Above the castle in the headmaster's office window, a light burning steadily, Dumbledore's light. He would be at his desk, and every owl in the owlery was refusing to fly, which Harry knew, and Dumbledore would know this too, and would be writing letters he couldn't send and revising plans whose premises had shifted. He would find new premises. Harry was certain of this. Dumbledore was too intelligent and too genuinely committed, underneath all the management of outcomes, not to. He would just have to find them without deciding their shape in advance. Harry looked up. Between 2 dorsal spines in the gap, the stars were clear. In Scotland, at this latitude, in this dark, at this distance from any light pollution, the stars as they actually were, the full fabric of them, not isolated points but continuous, layered, stretching from one horizon to the other in a density that made the word sky seem like the wrong word. Too small, too flat for what was actually up there. The vibration in his chest was steady. He pressed his back against the warm hide. There you are. Yeah, Harry said. The stars didn't move. The night went on. In the forest, in the lake, in the earth beneath him, 5 frequencies turned, slow and enormous and constant, like planets in an orbit he was the center of, not because he had planned it or earned it or been chosen by anything that consulted his preferences in advance. Because something older than planning had looked at him across 65 million years of geological patience and recognized the shape of him, and that recognition had turned out to be, as it always is with very old true things, completely impossible to argue with. He stayed until the sky began, very slowly at its eastern edge, to think about becoming morning. Then he went inside, went up to the dormitory, took off his shoes, lay down in his 4-poster, and slept completely, quietly, without the specific alert readiness that had governed his sleep in the cupboard under the stairs, slept the way things sleep when they are where they belong.